Bien le bonjour and welcome to this discussion video. I played a lot of Live Alive Remastered on Switch recently to the point of eventually finishing it. I won't spoil anything, however some things in this game made me think about the principle of fleeing in an RPG. And most of all, as the title says, I wondered if there really is a need to penalize players when they run away or are attempting to. To this day, I've been extremely lucky to have played a lot of different video games with probably over 50 RPGs. Even if I didn't finish them all, I realized that RPGs don't seem to have universal standards on how to escape from a battle. My goal with this video isn't to definitely prove that one is right or wrong, but rather invite you to a debate in the comment section or the different places you can contact me. Of course, I won't stop the video here and leave you alone. I will give you multiple examples of RPG type games and the way they handled fleeing from battles, as well as my opinion on them. Before we start, I'd like to warn you that I won't talk about the fights that specifically forced you to run away, such as the spider robot in FF8 or the first battle with Bahamut in FF3. I also won't talk about encounters you were supposed to lose and usually had the characters run away in the following cutscene, like the first boss of Radiant Historia. I will only cover the random encounters which gave you the choice between fighting or fleeing. Now, if you could humor me for a while, I'd like to ask you one simple question. Why would you run away from a battle in an RPG? First answer, because, well, it just gets terribly annoying. Let's not sugarcoat it. After a while, all we want is just to reach the next part of the plot, or something else. After endlessly killing level 1 goblins, your characters are now level 5, 6, maybe 15. So yeah, even if you can just kill the goblin now by frowning at it, all those random interruptions are only wasting your time. Some games give you a solution, such as FF8, with a passive ability you had to unlock with the GeForce Diablos. Like the name implied, Encounter None deactivated random encounters when you equipped it. There's another argument to be made about whether or not a game should immediately grant you the possibility to disable random battles or make it a goal to strive for, but that's not today's topic. Many games had semi-random encounters in the sense that enemies appeared while exploring and you could run into them or dodge them, which could be considered as a form of escaping now that I think about it. Final Fantasy XII was a rather good example, but since everything was more or less in real time, I don't know if it can be compared to, let's say, one of the first Paper Mario. Frankly, after your party had reached a decently high level, having to see through the screen transition into a battle, then selecting the action that will one-shot your opponent, then watch your characters do their little dance routine with a variant of Victory Fanfare, followed by the result screen, it gets tedious and grinds the confirm button terribly fast. Let's move on. Second answer or reason that would push you to run away from random battles, avoid a game over. I probably should have chosen this as the first answer since it's the most obvious. You don't have any healing items left, you underestimated the enemies or the boss, your characters are out of magic or mana points, and you haven't saved in a while. It really isn't the time to lose all of your progress, and your goal is now to reach the closest save point to use a tent or a town with an inn. Of course, many games handled that differently. Some alleviated all tension, like FF13 where your characters were fully healed at the end of a fight, with even an option to retry in case of a game over. Others, such as the Pokémon series, punished you by taking away half of the money you were carrying if you lost a battle, but at least you spawned back at the last Pokémon Center you visited. And now the third reason, you don't want to gain experience. Whether you're looking for a challenge or the game's mechanics are literally opposed to you leveling up too soon, too fast, I think this is the third and final reason why players would flee random encounters. The Kingdom Hearts series, as well as Final Fantasy XV, even went above and beyond by giving you an option to disable all EXP gains if you wanted to suffer. Regarding what I said about leveling up too soon, I have 4 clear examples in mind, all Final Fantasy games: the 1st, the 6th, the 8th, and the 9th. I will not explain every last details, but each of these games had mechanics improving stats gains when leveling up that were sometimes unlocked after the first half or near the end. Since you're smart people, you already understood that it was better to not level up too fast or too soon in order to get the best out of those bonuses. I didn't think I'd spend so much time on that first part, but at least that's out of the way. We will therefore start the true topic of this debate video: should players be penalized in a way or another for running away from a random encounter? Let me start with 2 games that punished you directly once you fled: Final Fantasy IV and Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga on Game Boy Advance. I had to specify because it was changed in the 3DS remake. In FF4, you had to actively maintain your fingers on precise buttons until your characters finally decided to leave the screen. Even though it was almost instantaneous, you could lose money by doing so. You could avoid the monetary loss by using the ninja spell Smoke or the white magic spell Teleport, but since they had an MP cost, we could argue that it was still a penalty, albeit a far lighter one. In Mario & Luigi, you had to select the escape option during the turn of one of the brothers, and once you started running, you had to commit to it. Depending on who you started with, you had to mash the corresponding button until he left the screen or fell over. Then it was the other brother's turn until both managed to leave the screen, but you were constantly losing money in the process, even more when one of them tripped and fell. Don't worry, you could still escape despite total bankruptcy. As opposed to FF4, you could see the enemies during exploration and even get a first strike by jumping on them or hitting them with the hammer, which dealt actual damages on all of them at the start of the battle. When you think about it, having a penalty when fleeing made more sense here rather than in FF4 where RNG reigned supreme over the random encounters. My personal opinion on this type of sanction is rather nuanced. If it is indeed a matter of survival, it might be too mean to add a layer of punishment on top of the risk of losing your progress because you desperately need to get to an inn. Trust me, despite my experience and my overly cautious way of playing RPGs, I still managed to mess up in the Steam port of FF3 a few years ago. I was out of potions as well as MPs and didn't know if I could reach the closest town just because I wanted to explore a bit too much. And the enemies around weren't really easy to kill, although FF3 didn't have any penalty for successfully running away. But in the end, I think that we can interpret this money-related punishment as a lesson, just like when you learn to ride a bike and you fall over then scratch your hands and or knees. What do you do next? You rage quit and decide to learn roller skating instead while swearing to never touch a bike ever again? Well, that's an option, but I expected you to answer that you will pay more attention to how properly ride a bike, while preferably wearing knee pads, a helmet, etc. A bit like grinding experience and buying new equipments to be better prepared against the upcoming battles. Furthermore, if I had to focus only on FF4 and Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga, leveling up was strongly recommended. There wasn't any late-game bonus like the GeForce character's abilities in FF8 or a trophy for finishing the game at level 1. So it really was just a matter of making the game harder for yourselves, but I'm not your father, so do as you wish. Don't hesitate to share with me other examples of this style of punishment if you want, or tell me that my opinion is the worst. In the meantime, let's head to the second type. Assuredly the most used system, no penalty when you actually escape, but the act of escaping isn't guaranteed or instantaneous. For the long-time fans of the Final Fantasy series, it's almost a given because it's been like this since the first. I will, however, limit my examples to only one Final Fantasy, the 7th, and I'll add a game from another series, Digital Devil Saga, also known as Avatar Tuner. Let's begin with FF7. To flee, you had to hold down 2 buttons, but it could take some time depending on various factors that I won't bother to cover. You could also pause your attempt by releasing the buttons and resume later. This escaping system didn't really expose you to any kind of danger, since you could still attack, cast spells, or use items. Once your characters finally fled, the battle ended without any penalty, nor any reward you could have won if you had, say, killed an opponent or 2 before fleeing. It's most likely because of nostalgia, but I always preferred this system over the others, even if it's a bit too permissive because fleeing was a parallel action that didn't impede on the rest. Which wasn't the case for the next game, Digital Devil Saga. It was a spin-off in 2 parts of the Shin Megami Tensei series, and you might have heard of another spin-off series, Persona. The Megami and Shin Megami Tensei games are somewhat infamous for having rather hard fights, with a turn-based system that will be too long to explain, but the gist of it is that you swap between the player's turn and the enemies. Contrary to FF7, you had to select the escape command, which meant that you could do nothing else once you confirmed your choice. Unfortunately, if luck wasn't on your side and you failed to escape, the enemies started their turn. I have to repeat myself, but the Megami Tensei games were quite brutal despite being turn-based, so letting your opponents get a free turn by trying to run away wasn't the best decision. Unless you are the lucky type. Which really isn't my case, so you can already guess that I'm not a fan of that kind of punishment. On the other hand, at least in Avatar Tuner, there was no reason to not level up outside of, once again, increasing the difficulty for yourself, so I understand why being a coward wasn't rewarded. Your opinion may be different or more nuanced, so I'm gonna start talking about the third and last category I could come up with. Running away shouldn't rely on RNG and/or you should even be rewarded. For the most chicken-hearted or those who just want to rush and be done with the main plot, it's almost a hard buy. Almost. I'm going to once again use 2 games as examples. Live Alive, specifically the remastered version because it works the same as the original, and Final Fantasy V, although FF8 could have worked for different reasons. Yes, I'm gonna stay in Squaresoft/Square Enix territory here because I couldn't think of other games when writing that video script. So, in Live Alive, there was no back or surprise attacks from the enemies, you were always the first one to act. And running away was not an issue either, you could just choose the command and you would immediately escape with no penalty, outside of giving up on any kind of reward if you disposed of an opponent or 2 before fleeing. If I had to comment on this, I would say that Live Alive, as opposed to Digital Devil Saga, was really too easy as an RPG. The game was clearly developed with the idea of letting you enjoy the story first and foremost. It's even more obvious with the ease of escaping without any punishment, with only 2 exceptions, but that's spoilers territory. Ultimate example of this debate or don't video, Final Fantasy V. I could have totally talked about FF7 instead, because both games had the same runaway system as well as a mechanic that benefited from it. But I wanted a bit more variety, so I'll cover the 5th and one of its side quests rewarding you with a very special weapon. In a town near the end of the game, you could meet with an old man next to 2 crates, each containing a weapon, the Brave Blade and the Chicken Knife. You could only get one of them, and, as their name implied, these weapons had hidden effects, depending on how many times you fled during your playthrough, even before you acquired them. The Brave Blade saw its power decrease permanently, before Pixel Remaster, for each time you run away, whereas the Chicken Knife could only get stronger with no way of losing its bonus, even if it would reach a cap. And that max potency was higher than the Brave Blade with 0 escape. On top of that, when you attacked with the knife, there was a chance for your characters to immediately flee the encounter, just like using the Thief's Flee command. Yes, we could consider that as its biggest downside, because if it triggered during a boss fight, you wasted a turn. But even with this, there were ways of circumventing that effect, like using the Mug command. In my opinion, considering that I'm the kind of player who would rather excessively level up my team members, I was never interested in the knife. But I do see why other players might favor it instead, especially since FF5 didn't have options or passive skills to prevent, or at least reduce, random encounters until the GBA version. And I said everything I had to say regarding what I consider as the 3 greater types of running away from random battles in RPGs and their possible penalties. I will sound like a broken record, but I will genuinely enjoy reading your negative or positive opinions on what I said, or at least your own experiences. With this, as usual, prenez soin de vous et amusez-vous bien!